As I said before, the competition is always swell. But who wins? You never can tell. In the place of the funky bass, the serious crew go ones and twos. Electro rock. What's gonna do it now? Next time, you gotta come a little harder. Don't get mad, Ozone, like that sometimes.
Convict Nation, we got to talk. We got to talk about something that is of some serious concern. To be honest with you, I really haven't been able to come up with an answer for this myself. And for the first time, I think I've been stumped. So let's talk about it. Welcome to the Convict Podcast, folks. I'm your host, lled. And before we get started, I have a few shout outs that I have to put out there prior to getting into today's segment. First of all, shout out to the loved ones of Daniel Sions. I always get contacted by the relatives of the victims that I cover on my show. And normally, you know, it's someone's mom or someone's brother or something like that. But I've been contacted by several people who were loved ones of Daniel Sions. And every last one of them told me he was a good man. And they often commented on how beautiful his soul was. Now, you know, for those of us who have lost, you know, people that we love, it's one thing to talk about, you know, a person's accomplishments or the type of person that they were. But in my personal experience dealing with death, I know when you comment on a person's soul, when you feel compelled to comment on a beautiful soul, that is indicative that that human being was one of a kind. Somebody who could come into a room and make everybody smile, or somebody who was known to give his last to the people that he cared about. And, you know, that's something that's very hard to deal with. That's harder to deal with than the average death, because a beautiful soul, you know, they come around once every blue moon. You know, we probably can count anywhere from 5 to 10 people that we know that died. In my case, way more than that. But out of that bunch of people who we know to be deceased, there's probably only one who was a beautiful soul. And that's irreplaceable. So I just wanted to send a shout out to his family and friends for contacting me and telling me about him. And I had a phone conversation with one of them, and you know, it was hard to get through, but I'm glad we had that conversation, because I think it's important that the world starts hearing from you guys personally, because it's one thing to hear from me. Everybody knows I detest Department of Corrections officers or staff members, period. You know, and while I'm on this topic, I have to send a humongous shout out to the people of Live Oak. Man, like, you guys are amazing. You guys are terrific. I've been hanging out in Live Oak on the internet. All right. And every time I'm there, they always remind me that, you know, there's two different views of what goes on with this prison stuff, you know. And I find that, you know, there are people who support what I do, and then there are people who support the Department of Corrections view. And, you know, as a matter of fact, commenting in that Live Oak community group is the reason I'm asking the question I have to ask today. But, you know, they opened my eyes to some things, you know, just chatting with the people in there. And I need to make some things very clear, folks. I have no faith in Department of Corrections at all. And I let them know, you know, in my personal views, the only good correctional officer is a dead one. Okay, that's not saying go and kill these people, but, you know, let's think about that guy, Captain Kirkland, the guy that blew his brains out. because he was facing a prosecution for abusing inmates and gassing inmates and breaking fingers and all of that. When he died, what happened? Did anybody else have their fingers broken? Was anybody else gassed? A correctional officer who does not do that is what? A very good correctional officer. You know what I mean? So that's my personal opinion. And hearing this type of stuff from me can be viewed as biased, because I am biased. I lived with these people. You can't tell me nothing about them. I don't give a damn what is in the news or what you can't tell me nothing about these folks. I know that they're pure evil, from the officers to the medical staff members to the admin to the folks up top in Tallahassee. It's nothing good about them, and you will never change my mind about that. Now, on the other hand, I know that good people happen to work there from time to time, but let me be very clear about why I believe that there's no such thing as a good correctional officer. When good people come to work in the Department of Corrections, as a matter of fact, for those of you guys who watch this show, who work in the Department of Corrections, and you think that you're a good one, I want to talk to you, okay? If you work in the Department of Corrections, right, and you think that you're a good human being, let me ask you a few things. Just a quick questionnaire. Have you ever been subjected to petty searches? How many times have they run canines around your car for no apparent reason? Have they found minor things in minor articles in your car and you receive write-ups for them? Okay. Do you work in the gun tower? Are you driving the perimeter truck? Okay. I ask those questions because I've seen it. I remember there was this old man. He was a correctional officer when I was at Liberty. And immediately when he did his first count in the dorm, I knew he was not supposed to be there. Okay. This old man, I wish I can remember his name. I think it was Wainwright or something like that. He came into the dorm. He did his count. And after he counted, he stopped and gave a speech. And he looked at all of us and he was like, man, I hate to see you guys like this. Nobody should be treated like this. You guys are living in horrible conditions. If I could, I would let you all out. I'm like, here you go. He's going to be fired tomorrow. And he gave this lengthy speech about how messed up his personal views of the prison system were. He was a trainee at the time. He gave his personal opinions, and he didn't know that the dorm sergeant was at the bubble listening in on what he was saying, right? When the next time he came out for count, this old man came out, he counted, and he was walking real fast. So I'm like, okay, something changed. We watched Sarge, chastise this man, but we couldn't hear what they were saying. The old man, when he finished counting, he stopped at the same exact spot where he gave that first speech. He looked at us and he says, and I better not hear another word or everybody's going to lock up. And then he walked out. I'm like, man, Sarge sent that man out here to change course on what he heard earlier. He told him to be an asshole. And it was not in that man's DNA. It was not in his personality profile, let's say, to be malicious at all. And it didn't last long. He put that front on because of the staff member he was working with, his superior in the dorm. And within days, they had that old man in the gun tower. He never came out again. What my point in telling you guys about that is that they will run good officers away from the Department of Corrections. Good people, they come to work there. We had that one mental health specialist that the other staff members were calling Hug-a-Thug. You remember that? And they ended up kidnapping her dog from her home and all of that. The real DOC folks will run the good ones off. They don't last long. Okay, go back to the video where I had this discussion at one of my speaking engagements with a former nurse who worked there. She will tell you how she sees them run the good ones off. The good ones don't last long. That's why I say the only good one is a dead one, because when good people do go there, they get rejected or they bounce themselves up out of there because they can't be around those monsters. The ones who stay, who make careers out of this over decades, and they advance and become they get all of this rank, They're evil, disgusting, deplorable people. Just what it is. So I want to give another shout out to everybody who came over from Texas Prison Stories. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the video. My boy Tim Snow, he's a good dude. He's the only other prison channel I really rock with. Thank you guys for coming along. I hope you guys enjoyed today's segment. And with that, I have to ask the question, folks. Today's segment is going to address this concern. Do sex offenders deserve to be killed in prison? Do they deserve it? Because I've been looking over some cases that teach valuable lessons, and it points to so much corruption in the system. But I've been skeptical of going over those cases because I don't know if I'm getting, I don't know what the feedback is from you guys. I don't know exactly where you stand on that, because when I pull these cases and I look over them and I decide to include them into my podcast, I don't look into everybody's cases. If it's somebody that I knew, I'll take a glance at it, but I just go over the Inspector General reports and the use of force because I'm focusing on the corruption. I found that some of the guys that I've covered were sexual sex offenders. They were sexual predators. And there was one case that I was looking at, I haven't done yet, but his case highlights something extremely alarming. But I don't know if I'm gonna do it because the man's a sex offender. So would I be wrong for doing that, or should I tell the story? You know what I mean? Are correctional officers, should they be applauded for killing these men? I mean, because you have to think about it. These guys preyed on children. You know what I mean? These guys, they rape women. You know what I mean? So, and I came to this, this concern came about because of, you know, my discussions in the live vote community. I love hearing from opposing views because, you know, if I'm wrong about something, I'll always want to be better. And, you know, ever since that woman, Christina Hempstead, posted that guy's crimes, I thought about that. It's like, man, am I coming off as some type of defender of these guys? I mean, I wouldn't want to do that. Am I so laser focused on the correctional people that I'm looking over something more important? Do these guys deserve what they're getting? Because those children damn sure didn't. So it's a tough one, folks, and I need to hear from you guys on that note, because I want different perspectives on that before I move forward covering any more sex offenders. And from now on, I'm going to be looking at their crimes. And if you think I'm wrong for that, I want to hear from you too. So there's a very important case out there. The guy's a sex offender. I'm not going to cover it until I get a general consensus that, right or wrong, a person does not deserve to die at the hands of these staff members. Because somebody in that live vote group asked me what happens when an inmate kills a sex offender. And I said something that shocked myself. I said I wouldn't even talk about it. So am I wrong? Or do those cases deserve to be spotlighted too? Because I'm gonna say this for the record, the way that the correctional officers killed them is still criminal, okay? But with those guys, you know, sometimes we have to rely on karma, like with the Keith Turner situation. He did all of those crimes and it took for karma to get him, and we applauded, we celebrated karma. Is it the same thing with these sex offenders? So that's what I want to answer to. So without further ado, we're going to skip over the sex offenders that I found, and we're going to talk about a different case. Today's segment is going to be focused on inmate William Torres. Okay, now I'm going to read the actual report, and I'm going to tell you guys which parts were redacted, and we're going to try to fill in the blanks, but this one highlights another concern too. And This case was actually disposed of by Inspector Louis Cordova. And for those of you guys who read the book, you know that the last chapter of that book was about Louis Cordova because of what he represented. And that was a hell of an experience, you know what I mean? Just talking to him and everything coming to a head the way that it did, you know what I was getting at in the book. But this inspector, the last chapter of the book was focused specifically on him. And you guys got the scoop on that. So let's get into it, man. According to this report, based on exhibits and witness testimony as a whole, Officer Carl McClamor was assigned to S dormitory at approximately 4:40 a.m. He was advised that inmate Torres blank and blank. Staff responded, and a whole couple of sentences is redacted. And then they pronounced him deceased at 5:20 a.m. So he died about an hour later after staff responded. And if staff responded, that means there was a group of people that came in and used some force. So all involved security staff were interviewed. Statements confirmed blank on inmate Torres. So that means, in my opinion, the statements confirmed force was used on this inmate. So all of the inmates who were housed in S2 dormitory were interviewed and did not know how or by what manner inmate Torres became deceased. So they interviewed all of the inmates, and some way or somehow they, in my opinion, coerced these inmates into saying, we didn't see nothing. If you guys remember in the book where I spoke about the use of force that happened at Swanee, where there were 19 witnesses and I was the only one that said something, it was something similar to that. 19 witnesses witnessed the use of force and nobody seen nothing. You know what I mean? And then that was a way to where you could not miss it. And out of 19 people, only one person said what really happened. So they coerce inmates all the time. And apparently these inmates refused to say what they saw. So statements received indicated that inmate Torres appeared blank following visitation. So they go back into his visitation records, and apparently he was not on the radar for any suspected introduction of contraband. He was not on the radar for any K2 usage, but in order to justify a use of force, they went back to his visitation records, and they saw he received a visit from a woman named Mrs. Hall. I'm not gonna put her whole name out there, but her name is Mrs. Hall. She visited him, and they have no evidence that any contraband was passed between the two of them. So they pulled the phone records, and this inspector, he says that he listened in on the phone calls, and it sounded like a conspiracy to introduce contraband into the facility. He doesn't say which part of the conversation implied that. He doesn't say which part of the conversation, what type of contraband was supposed to be introduced, but they're setting the stage to throw K2 into the equation. So they try to come to a conclusion that this woman and this inmate introduced some K2 into the prison, and since statements said that he might have been walking funny, they don't even have this on tape. They say that he was walking funny, or he appeared blank, which probably appeared intoxicated or something. They're painting an unrealistic picture of a man who is high on drugs, and they try to chalk this whole use of force up to him being high, and the use of force being a result of them killing a man who was freaking out on K2. They get the toxicology report back, and there's nothing in this report that says he tested positive for K2. So they painted this elaborate picture of a man introducing drugs into a prison. They've implicated one of his loved ones in this conspiracy, and they have inconclusive toxicology reports, according to what I'm reading. Inconclusive toxicology reports, but you painted this whole picture about a man introducing K2 into the prison, and now you're saying that they're just trying to clap the whole thing up to that. However, this report does say that this was a criminal investigation. So the state attorney, in the end, concludes that there isn't enough evidence to prove that the staff acted with criminal intent. So if this was based on K2, why is there a criminal investigation on the staff members? Because he died from a use of force. Let's say he was high, for the record. What did that use of force consist of? They said that the investigation confirmed that there was something on him. Was it chemical agents? How many lacerations did he have? You know what I mean? How many bumps and bruises? How much trauma was applied to his head? You know what I mean? And his extremities. They went into absolutely no detail about the use of force, but there's a criminal investigation. There's not going to be a criminal investigation if I'm at fault for my own death. And it was a criminal investigation on every one of the staff members who responded to S-Dorm. So it's another one. I mean, this stuff is countless. You know what I mean? They're gonna paint a picture of these guys, you know, being high on these drugs to somehow justify it. They couldn't even justify it in this case, but they took the time to put most of that stuff in the report. You know what I mean? So another one, use of force. They're blaming it on the K2. We'll never see an end to it. And as you guys seen in the video, the parody at the beginning of this segment, that's essentially the Florida prison reform fight in a nutshell. I'll point out all of the facts, and the people at the top, they're gonna, you know, it's irrelevant. How many deaths do we have to point out before they realize the body cameras are an issue? Uses of force are the reason the inmates are dying, and the K2 epidemic is being scapegoated. You know what I mean? But like the DJ said, don't get mad, Ozone. It be like that sometimes. Seems like it's like that all the time to me.